Welcome to John Carter Stories. When my wife passed away, her wealthy employer called me and said, "Marcus, I discovered something important. Come to my office immediately." Then he added something that made my blood run cold. "Do not tell your son or your daughter-in-law. Your life could be in danger." When I arrived and saw who was waiting at the door, I froze. Every muscle in my body went rigid, and I realized my wife didn't just die, she was stolen from me. But before I tell you what I found in that office, you need to understand how the day of her funeral became the day my own son went to war against me. My name is Marcus Sullivan, and I am 72 years old. I spent 40 years managing logistics in a warehouse, and before that I carried a rifle for this country in places most people can't pronounce. I know how to read people, and I know when danger is coming. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for the storm that walked into Grace Community Church that humid Tuesday morning. Please subscribe and like this video and listen to my story till the end, and let me know which city you're listening from. That way, I can see how far my story has traveled, because what happened to me, it could happen to anyone. I sat in the front pew staring at the mahogany casket that held Margaret, my Margaret. We had been married for 45 years. She was a small woman with hands roughened by decades of work, but a heart that could embrace the whole world. For 3 decades, she had worked as a head housekeeper and personal assistant to Christopher Ashford, a man with more money than most countries, but who trusted only one person with his life, and that was my wife. The organ music was soft, a low hum that vibrated in my chest like a second heartbeat. The church was filling up with neighbors, people from the choir, and even some of Mr. Ashford's staff. Everyone was whispering in respectful, low tones. Everyone except the 2 people who should have been sitting right next to me. My son Devin and his wife Crystal were late. Not 5 minutes late. 40 minutes late. The service had already begun when the heavy oak doors at the back of the sanctuary banged open like a gunshot. I didn't turn around, but I didn't have to. I heard the sharp clack of high heels against the stone floor echoing through the sacred space like hammers on nails. Heads turned. I could feel the collective intake of breath from the congregation, that sharp inhale of disapproval. I kept my eyes fixed on the flowers atop Margaret's casket. White roses, her favorite. Then I smelled them before I saw them. A cloud of expensive, cloying perfume that smelled like desperation mixed with money, layered over the stale scent of cigarettes that no amount of body spray could hide. Devin slid into the pew beside me. He was wearing a bright cream-colored suit that looked like something a nightclub owner would wear to a wedding, not a son to his mother's funeral. He didn't touch my shoulder. He didn't squeeze my hand. He didn't even glance at the casket where his mother lay. He pulled out his phone. The screen lit up in the dim church, illuminating his face with that cold blue glow. He was texting. His thumbs moved furiously, his jaw tight and clenched. I glanced sideways and saw the sweat beading on his forehead. It wasn't from grief. Oh no, it was the cold sweat of a man who's been cornered, a man running out of time. Crystal squeezed in next to him, huffing and adjusting her dress. She was a white woman from a middle-class suburb who pretended she was born in a penthouse. She wore huge black sunglasses inside the church and a dress that was too short and too tight for any occasion, let alone this one. She fanned herself for the funeral program, looking around with open disdain written all over her face. "This place is a sauna," she whispered loudly enough for the entire choir to hear. Didn't they have money for air conditioning? "Shoo," Devin hissed, but he didn't put his phone away. I gripped the handle of my cane. It was a sturdy piece of hickory what I had carved myself years ago. My knuckles turned white. I wanted to tell them to leave. I wanted to tell them to show some respect for the woman who had paid for Devin's college, who had paid for their wedding, who had bailed him out more times than I could count on both hands. But I said nothing. I was a man of discipline. I would not cause a scene at Margaret's homegoing. The service ended, and we moved to the fellowship hall for the repast. The church ladies had prepared all the food Margaret loved: fried chicken, collard greens, macaroni and cheese, and cornbread that melted in your mouth. The smell was comforting to everyone else, but it seemed to physically offend Crystal. She stood near the wall holding a paper plate with 2 fingers, as if it were contaminated with disease. I watched her from my seat in the corner. She leaned in close to Devin, and I have hearing aids that I keep tuned very high. Most people think I'm just a deaf old man who can't hear a thing. But I hear everything. I can't believe we have to eat this grease, Crystal hissed, her voice dripping with disgust. My stomach is turning just looking at it. And look at these people. This whole thing is so cheap. Where did all her money go, Devin? You said she had savings. She spent it on pills, Devin muttered, his mouth full of food he hadn't bothered to bless. Well, at least that expense is gone now, Crystal said, and she let out a small, cruel laugh that made my skin crawl. That's $500 a month back in our pockets. My heart stopped. Then it started beating again with a slow, heavy rhythm of pure rage. My wife wasn't even in the ground an hour, and they were celebrating the savings on her heart medication. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling, shaking like leaves in a storm. Not from age, from the urge to wrap them around something, to make them understand what they just said. The room began to clear out. Neighbors came by to shake my hand, to offer condolences that felt like bandages on a wound too deep to heal. I nodded and thanked them, but my eyes never left my son. He was pacing by the exit, checking his watch every 30 seconds like he had somewhere important to be. Finally, when the last guest had left, Devin walked over to me. He didn't ask how I was doing. He didn't ask if I needed a ride home. He stood over me, blocking the light, casting a shadow across my face. "Dad," he said, his voice flat and emotionless. "Where's the key to Mom's safe?" I looked up at him slowly, deliberately. I saw the bags under his eyes, dark purple like bruises. I saw the twitch in his cheek. This was my boy, the boy I taught to fish on Sunday mornings, the boy Margaret had rocked to sleep every single night. Now he looked at me like I was an ATM that had swallowed his card. "What did you say?" I asked, my voice raspy and low. "The safe key," Devin repeated, louder this time, agitation creeping into his voice. "Crystal says Mom had a life insurance policy. We need to check the paperwork. We're entitled to 50% as next of kin." Crystal stepped up beside him, crossing her arms over her chest like she was settling in for a fight. "We need to start the probate process immediately, Marcus. Funerals are expensive, and we have bills piling up. We know Margaret hoarded cash in the house. Everyone knows it." I stood up. It took me a moment, my knees stiff and protesting. I leaned on my cane and looked them both dead in the eye. I'm 6'2". Even bet with age, I still towered over Crystal. "Your mother isn't even cold yet," I said, my voice low and dangerous, vibrating with barely controlled fury. "And you're asking for money." "It's not about money," Devin snapped, his face flushing red. "It's about asset management. Don't be difficult, Dad. We know you don't know how to handle finances. You just worked in a warehouse your whole life. Mom handled everything. We're just trying to help." "Help?" The word tasted like poison on my tongue. "You're trying to scavenge," I said. "There's no money for you, Devin. Not today. Not ever." Devin stepped closer, invading my personal space, his eyes wild and desperate. "Listen to me, old man," he said, and I flinched at those words. Old man, not Dad. You don't know what's going on. This house is in trouble. We're in trouble. If we don't find that money by the end of the week, things will get very, very bad." "What kind of bad?" I asked, my voice steady despite the fear creeping up my spine. "The kind where you end up on the street." Devin spat, spraying me with his words. "Now give me the damn key, or I'll turn this house upside down until I find it myself." He reached for my pocket, his hand grabbing at me like I was a stranger on the street. I slapped his hand away with a speed that surprised us both. The crack echoed in the empty hall. "Get out of my face." I growled. Crystal gasped dramatically, her hand flying to her chest. "You're senile," she shrieked, her voice hitting a pitch that could shatter glass. "You're losing your mind, Marcus. We should have you committed for your own safety." "We'll discuss that later, Crystal," Devin said, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper that chilled me to my core. "Dad, you have until tonight. If I don't have that key by midnight, I'm calling the social worker. I'll tell them you're unfit to live alone. I'll sell this house out from under you, and there's nothing you can do to stop me." He turned and stormed out, his footsteps heavy and angry. Crystal shot me one last look of pure disgust before following him, her heels clicking away like a ticking clock, counting down to something terrible. I stood alone in the fellowship hall. The silence was deafening, pressing against my ears like water. My own son. He was desperate, truly desperate. I had seen that look in the eyes of junkies and gamblers before, back in my warehouse days. He wasn't just greedy. He was afraid. And afraid men do terrible things. Have you ever had family turn on you in your darkest hour? Drop a comment below. Suddenly, my phone buzzed in my breast pocket, vibrating against my chest like an angry bee. I pulled out with shaking hands, almost dropping it twice. The screen was cracked from when I dropped it last month, but I could read the name clearly. Mr. Christopher Ashford, Margaret's boss. The billionaire who hadn't left his estate in 5 years due to his health. Why was he calling me right now? I answered, my voice barely a whisper. Hello, Marcus. His voice wasn't the smooth, commanding baritone I remember from years ago. It was jagged, breathless, urgent. Marcus, listen to me very carefully. Mr. Ashford, Listen to me, Marcus. He cut me off, his words rapid fire. I was going through the safe Margaret kept here at my private office. She left something behind. A ledger and a recording. Marcus, you need to come to my estate right now. Right this second. Do not go home. Do not tell Devin. Do not tell that woman he married. If they know what I know, you will not survive the night. The room spun around me like I was on a carousel. I grabbed the back of a chair to steady myself, my cane clattering to the floor. What are you talking about, Mr. Ashford? What recording? Ashford's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, and what he said next stopped my heart completely. They didn't just wait for her to die, Marcus, he said, his voice breaking with emotion. They helped her along. They killed her, Marcus. Your son killed his own mother. But what I found when I walked into that billionaire's office, what I saw with my own eyes, it made me realize the nightmare was only just beginning. I told Devin I had to go see the pastor to settle the final bill for service. It was a lie. But lies were the only currency my son understood anymore, the only language he seemed to speak these days. I grabbed my keys from the hook by the door, my hand still trembling from the phone call. But before I could turn the handle, a perfectly manicured hand slammed against the wood, blocking my path with a loud smack. It was Crystal. She was still wearing that black dress that was way too tight, and her eyes were hidden behind those ridiculous oversized sunglasses. Even though we were standing inside a dim hallway with barely any light, she held out her palm, her fingers wiggling expectantly like a child demanding candy. Where do you think you're going, Marcus? She asked, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness that made my skin crawl. To pay the church, I said, keeping my voice flat and emotionless. You're not going anywhere without leaving the credit card, she said, stepping closer until I could smell her perfume mixed with something sharper. I need to go buy supplies for the guests who might drop by later. We need wine. We need decent cheese. Not that garbage the church ladies serve today. I looked at her. I really looked at her for the first time in years. I saw the way her eyes darted to my back pocket, where my wallet lived. She didn't want cheese. She wanted to go to the mall. She wanted a new handbag to match her funeral attire. She wanted to swipe my card until the magnetic strip wore completely off, just like she had done to Margaret for years without us knowing. I reached into my pocket slowly. Crystal smiled, a greedy little smirk that showed all her teeth. I pulled out my wallet. Her hand twitched with anticipation. I opened it and pulled out a single $20 bill. It was wrinkled and worn, just like me. I let it drop from my fingers. It fluttered through the air in slow motion and landed on the linoleum floor right between her expensive designer heels. Get some crackers, I said, my voice cold as ice. Her mouth fell open, her jaw actually dropping. She looked at the money, then back at me, her face turning a blotchy, angry red. Is this a joke? She screeched, her voice echoing off the walls. Do you know who I am? I know exactly who you are, I said, stepping forward. She flinched backward, actually flinched. For just a second, the mask slipped and I saw the fear underneath. She scrambled back, stepping aside to let me pass, her eyes staying glued to that $20 bill on the floor. She would pick it up. I knew she would. She would pick it up the moment the door closed, because greed has no pride, no dignity, no shame. I walked out into the humid afternoon air and climbed into my 1990 Ford pickup. The door creaked with that familiar, mournful sound as I pulled it shut. The cab smelled of old leather and pipe tobacco, a smell that reminded me of simpler times. It was my sanctuary, my fortress. The engine roared to life with a cough and a sputter, but it settled into a steady, reliable rhythm. This truck was like me, ugly and battered on the outside, but it never quit, never gave up. I backed out of the driveway, leaving my son and his wife to fight over the scraps of my house like vultures over a carcass. As I drove down the street, the houses began to blur together. I wasn't just driving to the other side of town. I was driving back in time, back through 45 years of memories. I thought about Margaret. For 30 years, she had left our house at dawn and returned after dark, day after day after day. She took the bus to the north side, to the gated estates where the driveways were longer than our entire block. She scrubbed floors until her knees ached. She polished silver until it gleamed. She organized lives that weren't her own, lives of people who barely saw her as human. To the world, she was just a housekeeper, a servant, invisible and forgettable. But Margaret saw everything. She knew where the skeletons were buried because she was the one dusting the closets, organizing the secrets. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles popping with the pressure. My son Devin thought I was just a tired old man who moved boxes in a warehouse for 40 years. He forgot what I did before the warehouse. He forgot that Uncle Sam sent me to a jungle halfway across the world when I was just 18 years old, barely old enough to shave. You learn things in war. You learn things they don't teach in any school. You learn that the quietest moments are the most dangerous. You learn to watch the grass for movement that shouldn't be there. You learn that when the enemy smiles at you, he's usually holding a knife behind his back, waiting for the right moment to strike. I had been watching Devin and Crystal for months now, paying attention to the little things. I noticed the new watch Devin wore that cost more than my truck was worth. I noticed the way Crystal stopped leaving receipts on the counter. I noticed the way Margaret had grown quiet in the weeks before she died, her eyes darting to the phone every time it rang, like she was waiting for bad news. I had been trained to spot an ambush, to sense danger before it arrived. But I never thought, not in my worst nightmares, that the enemy would be sleeping in the guest bedroom of my own house. I merged onto the highway, the old Ford vibrating under my hands like a living thing. I checked my mirrors constantly, scanning for anyone following. Old habits die hard, they really do. No one was following me. Devin was too busy trying to find the safe key to notice I was gone. I took the exit for Highland Park. The air changed here, transformed completely. It smelled of fresh-cut grass and old money, privilege and power. The fences grew higher. The gates became more elaborate, more intimidating. I pulled up to the massive iron gates of the Ashford estate. A security camera buzzed and turned toward me like a mechanical eye. I rolled down the window, the old crank squeaking. "Marcus Sullivan," I said to the camera. The gate clicked and swung open silently, smoothly, like it was opening into another world entirely. I drove up the winding paved driveway lined with oak trees that were older than the country itself, their branches creating a canopy overhead. My rusted truck looked like a stain on a white sheet against the pristine landscaping, completely out of place. I parked next to a silver Rolls-Royce that probably cost more than my house. The contrast would have made a lesser man feel small, insignificant. It just made me feel focused, clear-headed. I got out and adjusted my suit jacket. It was a cheap suit bought off the rack 10 years ago, the stitching coming loose in places. But I wore it with the posture of a man who answers to no one, who bows to nothing. The front door opened before I could knock, before I could even raise my hand. Christopher Ashford stood there in his wheelchair. He was 80 years old now, confined to that chair by time and illness, his body withered by the years, but his eyes were as sharp as broken glass, missing nothing. He wore a velvet smoking jacket and a silk scarf around his neck. He didn't look at me like the help. He didn't look at me like a charity case or someone beneath him. He looked at me like a man who was about to go into battle and was genuinely glad to see another soldier standing beside him. "Marcus," he said, his voice raspy but firm, filled with emotion. Mr. Ashford. I nodded respectfully. He extended a hand. It was thin and trembling slightly, the skin almost translucent, but his grip was surprisingly strong, surprisingly steady. We didn't shake hands like businessmen conducting a transaction. We clasped hands like brothers, like men who had been through hell together. "I'm so sorry about Margaret," he said, his voice thick with genuine grief. "She was the finest woman I ever knew in my entire life. Better than me, better than all of us combined." "Thank you, sir," I said, my throat tightening painfully. "Come inside," Ashford said, spinning his wheelchair around with practiced ease. "We don't have much time. Your son will figure out you're gone soon, and when he does, things will get dangerous." I followed him into the foyer. The floors were marble, gleaming like glass. The ceiling soared 20 feet high, disappearing into shadow. It was a palace, grand and impressive, but it felt cold, sterile, empty. Margaret had been the warmth in this house, the heart that made it feel alive. Without her, it was just a museum filled with expensive things that meant nothing. What would you do if you discovered a family secret this dark? Let me know in the comments. We went past a grand staircase, past a formal dining room where a long table sat empty and polished, and down a hallway lined with portraits of dead ancestors who looked down at me with disapproval in their painted eyes. I stared right back at them, unafraid. I had buried more men than they had ever met in their privileged lives. Ashford led me to his private study at the back of the house. It was a room I had never been in before, never been invited to enter. The walls were lined with leather-bound books that probably cost a fortune. The air smelled of cedar and brandy, expensive and rich. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn tight, blocking out the afternoon sun, casting the room in deep shadow. But we weren't alone. Standing by the fireplace was a man I didn't recognize. He was tall and lean, wearing a trench coat that looked like it had seen better days, seen harder times. He had a scar running down his left cheek, and eyes that looked like they had seen the bottom of too many bottles and the bottom of humanity itself. "Marcus, this is Mr. Blake," Ashford said, gesturing to the stranger. "He's a private investigator. Margaret hired him 2 months ago." My heart skipped a beat, actually stopped for a second. Margaret hired a private investigator? Why? What did she know? Blake nodded at me without smiling. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and respect that made my stomach turn. "Please sit down, Mr. Sullivan," Ashford said, gesturing to a heavy leather chair in front of his massive oak desk. I sat. The leather creaked beneath my weight. I felt like I was sitting in the electric chair, just waiting for someone to throw the switch and end it all. Ashford wheeled himself behind the desk. He placed his trembling hands on a stack of items, sitting in the center of the green desk blotter. There was a small black leather journal that I recognized immediately. It was Margaret's prayer journal. She carried it everywhere, never went anywhere without it, and next to it was a thick envelope filled with photographs. "I found this in the safe Margaret kept here," Ashford said softly, his voice gentle. "She had her own combination. I never asked what was in it. I trusted her completely, without question. But after she passed, I knew I had to look. I had to make sure her affairs were in order." He pushed the journal toward me with shaking fingers. "Open it, Marcus," he said. "Read the last entry she made." My hands shook as I reached for the book. The leather was warm, almost alive, as if she had just been holding it moments ago. I opened it to the bookmark, a pressed flower she'd saved from our anniversary. The handwriting was hers, neat and looping and beautiful. But the ink was shaky, trembling, as if she had been writing in a hurry or in terrible fear. I read the words, and my world crumbled. "Devin asked for money again today." I told him no. He looked at me with eyes I didn't recognize anymore. He looked at me like he hated me, like I was his enemy. "I found the pills in his jacket pocket this afternoon. They look just like my heart medication, exactly the same, but they aren't. I checked. I'm scared, Marcus. I'm so scared of our son. I don't know what to do. I'm scared of what he might do to me." I stopped reading. The room seemed to tilt sideways. I couldn't breathe, couldn't get air into my lungs. Mr. Blake spoke up then, his voice gravelly and rough. "Look at the photos, Mr. Sullivan. You need to see what we found." I reached for the envelope with trembling hands. I poured the contents onto the desk. Dozens of photos spilled out like a waterfall of evidence. They were grainy, taken with a long-range lens from a distance, but the subjects were crystal clear. There was Devin. He was standing in an alleyway talking to a man with tattoos crawling up his neck. Devin was handing over a thick wad of cash, hundreds of bills. There was another photo. Devin and Crystal sitting in a car, champagne bottle in hand. Crystal was laughing, holding up the bottle like she won a prize. They were celebrating something. But the last photo made me freeze completely. It felt like a physical blow to my chest, knocking all the air from my lungs. It was taken through the kitchen window of my own house. It was taken 3 nights ago. The timestamp in the corner said 2 a.m., the dead of night. In the photo, Devin was standing at the kitchen counter. He was holding 2 orange prescription bottles in his hands. One was Margaret's heart medication, clearly labeled. The other was unlabeled, anonymous. He was pouring the pills from one bottle into the other, switching them, replacing them, and he was smiling. My son, my flesh and blood, the boy I had carried on my shoulders when he was little, the boy I had taught to tie his shoes and ride a bike. He was switching the pills that kept his mother alive. He killed her. He killed her. I whispered, the words feeling like gravel scraping up my throat. He killed his own mother for money. Ashford leaned forward, his face grim and tired. He didn't just kill her, Marcus. He executed her. He planned it. He carried it out, and now he's coming for you next. You're the only thing standing between him and her money. Why? I asked, looking up, my eyes burning but somehow dry, too shocked for tears. Why would he do this? What kind of monster did I raise? Ashford pointed to the journal again with a shaking finger. Turn the page, Marcus. Look at what she was hiding from you. Look at what she was hiding from everyone, even me. I turned the page with numb fingers. And there, pasted carefully into the book, was a bank statement. The balance wasn't a few $1,000s. It wasn't even 100,000. It was $3 million. My Margaret, the housekeeper who clipped coupons and darned my socks, the woman who saved aluminum foil to reuse. She was a millionaire, had been for years, and Devin knew. Somehow he had found out. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train slamming into a wall. He didn't kill her because he hated her. He killed her because he was greedy, because he wanted what she had built. He killed her for a payday, for money he hadn't earned. And what they told me to do next, what they asked me to become, it would either save my life or destroy what was left of my soul forever. I stood up so fast a heavy leather chair fell backward with a crash that echoed through the study like thunder. I'm going to kill him. I roared, my voice raw and animal. I'm going to go back there right now, and I'm going to put a bullet in his head. He doesn't deserve to live. He doesn't deserve to breathe the same air as decent people. I reached for my back waistband where the cold steel of my service pistol pressed against my spine, that familiar weight I'd carried for protection. No! Ashford shouted, his voice cracking like a whip through the air. Marcus, stop. Stop right now. I froze, my hand on the gun, my chest heaving like I'd run a marathon. If you kill him now, you go to prison for the rest of your life, Blake said, stepping forward with his hands raised like he was approaching a dangerous animal. You'll rot in a cell, and Devin wins anyway. He becomes a victim, the poor son whose father went crazy. And Crystal will spend every dime of that money on vacations and jewelry, while you die behind bars. Is that what you want? Is that what Margaret would want for you? I looked at the photo of my son, that smiling monster in my kitchen. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely see straight. Then what do I do? I asked, my voice breaking like glass. What the hell am I supposed to do? We trap him, Ashford said, his eyes cold and hard as diamonds. We make him confess on tape. We make him destroy himself with his own words, his own arrogance. But to do that, Marcus, you have to go back there. You have to walk back into that house with him. Go back. I asked, my voice rising. You want me to go back and live with the man who murdered my wife? Yes, Ashford said firmly. You have to go back and play the part. You have to be the grieving, confused old man they think you are, You have to make Devin think he's won, that you're weak and helpless. Because when he gets comfortable, when he thinks he's safe, he'll make mistakes. And when he slips up, we'll be there to catch every word, every confession. Can you do that, Marcus? Can you look the man who murdered your wife in the eye every single day and pretend you don't know the truth? I looked at the journal, at Margaret's terrified handwriting. I looked at the photos of my son's betrayal. I thought about Margaret, about the fear she must have felt in those final days, knowing her own son was planning to kill her. I took a deep breath that hurt my chest. I straightened my jacket and picked up my cane from where it had fallen. I was a soldier once, a long time ago. I know how to follow orders, even when they're the hardest orders I've ever received. And I know how to wait for the perfect moment to take the kill shot. I'll do it, I said, my voice steady now, cold and determined. Tell me what I need to do. Ashford nodded with something like respect in his eyes. Good. Now listen very carefully, Marcus. Here's exactly what we're going to do. And as he laid out the plan step by step, I felt the old soldier inside me waking up from a long sleep, stretching, preparing for battle. My son thought he was a predator hunting easy prey. He thought I was weak, helpless, defeated. He was about to find out that he had walked into the den of a lion. Ashford pushed the small black leather journal across the mahogany desk toward me. It still smelled of lavender, that scent Margaret always wore, her signature. My hands trembled as I opened again. The handwriting was hers, those neat loops I had known and loved for 45 years. But the words were strangers to me, revealing a life I never knew existed. I started reading, flipping through pages I hadn't seen before. March 12th. Mr. Ashford portfolio is up 12% this quarter. My recommendations on the tech startups paid off better than expected. He's pleased. I stare at the page, reading it again and again. Recommendations? My Margaret, the woman who clipped coupons for canned corn and shopped at thrift stores, was giving investment advice to a billionaire? I looked up at Ashford, confusion written all over my face. He nodded slowly. Margaret wasn't just my housekeeper, Marcus. She was my financial compass, my secret weapon. She had a gift that I've never seen in anyone else. She saw patterns in the market that no one else could see, like she had a sixth sense for money. Over 30 years, I paid her a commission on every successful trade she guided me toward, every single one. I turned the page, my hands shaking harder now. A bank statement was pasted there, official and undeniable. The balance made my breath hitch in my throat, made me dizzy. $3 million. My wife, my beautiful Margaret, was a millionaire. She had built a fortune in silence, in secret, scrubbing floors by day and studying markets by night, while I slept, completely unaware. But as I flipped forward through the journal, the tone of the entries changed dramatically. The ink became jagged, panicked, afraid. January 4th, I found another withdrawal from my account. $2,000. The signature looks like mine, but the loop on the E is wrong, slightly off. It's Devin. I know it's him. He's been practicing my signature. February 10th. $5,000 this time. Just gone. I confronted him about the money. He denied it, screamed at me, got right in my face. He said I owed him this money. He said I owed him for being born. I looked at the total loss calculated at the bottom of the page in Margaret's careful handwriting. $50,000 in 2 years. $50,000. My son had been bleeding his mother dry, stealing from her while driving a leased Mercedes and wearing Italian suits that cost more than most people make in a month. The shame burned in my chest hotter than the grief, hotter than anything I'd ever felt. She never told me. She carried this burden completely alone, suffering in silence to protect me from the truth about our boy, about what he had become. She died trying to save her life savings from his greed, from his endless, bottomless greed. Blake, the private investigator, stepped forward, his trench coat rustling. He laid out a series of high-resolution photographs on the desk with careful precision. They were taken with a night vision lens, grainy and green, but clear enough to stop my heart completely. Mr. Sullivan, look at the timestamp carefully, Blake said, pointing. 2:14 a.m., 3 days before your wife passed away. The photos showed my kitchen, every detail sickeningly familiar. The checkered curtains Margaret sewed herself were visible in the window. And there was Devin, my son, standing by the counter where Margaret kept her daily pill organizer, that little plastic box with the days of the week labeled on it. In his hand, he held a small amber vial that looked identical to her heart medication bottles. But in the next photo, the sequence continued like a horror movie. He was pouring the contents of that vial into her organizer, carefully replacing her real pills, and pocketing her actual medication. Blake pointed a callous finger at the damning image. We analyzed the trash from your curb the next morning. We found the vial he threw away, buried under coffee grounds. It didn't contain beta blockers like her real medication. It contained a concentrated stimulant, a high-grade amphetamine mixture dangerous enough to cause cardiac arrest in a healthy man. For someone with your wife's heart condition, it was absolutely fatal. Ashford spoke up, his voice like gravel grinding together. It wasn't a heart attack, Marcus. It was murder. Calculated, cold-blooded, premeditated murder. He waited until her prescription was running low, so she wouldn't notice the switch. Then he made his move. He knew exactly what he was doing, had it all planned out. He watched her take those pills every morning. He watched her slowly die, and he did absolutely nothing to stop it. And he did it all for money, because she was about to cut him off completely. I looked at the photo of my son again, really studied it. His face was illuminated by the refrigerator light, casting shadows that made him look demonic. He wasn't crying. He wasn't hesitating or showing any sign of regret. He was smirking, actually smiling like he was proud of himself. The monster who lived in my house. The boy I taught to ride a bike, to throw a baseball, to be a man. He had poisoned the woman who gave him life because he wanted a payout he hadn't earned, because he thought he deserved her money more than she deserved to live. A sound escaped my throat that I didn't recognize, a low, guttural roar of pure animal pain and rage. The room spun around me like a carousel. I grabbed the edge of the desk, so hard it creaked under my grip, my fingers digging into the polished surface. My vision blurred with red-hot tears that burned my eyes. Could you forgive someone who did this to your family? I need to know what you think. I stood up again, knocking the heavy leather chair backward a second time. I could feel the weight of the service pistol in the small of my back. It was calling to me, whispering promises of justice, of revenge. I needed it in my hands. I needed to feel the recoil, the power. I needed to see the fear in Devin's eyes that Margaret must have felt in her final moments. I'm going to kill him. The words tore out my throat, raw and bleeding and honest. I'm going to drive back there right now, and I'm going to put him down like the rabid dog he is. He doesn't deserve to breathe. He doesn't deserve a trial or mercy or anything. He took my Margaret. He took my entire life. I turned toward the door, my hand reaching for the handle, my mind made up. I wasn't a father anymore. That part of me died when I saw those photos. I was an executioner now, an instrument of justice. I could see it all playing out in my mind like a movie. The kick of the door, the look on Crystal's face, the final judgment delivered in lead and gunpowder. Justice, immediate and permanent and final. Stop. Ashford's voice cracked through the air like a whip striking flesh. He slammed his frail hand on the desk hard enough to make everything jump. Booker, Marcus, stop walking. If you walk out that door with a gun and murder in your heart, you lose everything. Everything Margaret worked for, everything she built. You'll go to prison for the rest of your natural life. And Devin wins. He becomes a victim, the grieving son whose father went insane. He inherits the house. He inherits the money, and Crystal spends every dime Margaret saved while you rot in a cell eating prison food and dying alone. Is that what you want? Is that really what Margaret would want for you? I froze, my hand on the doorknob, my chest heaving like I'd run a marathon. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Blake stepped between me and the door, his hands raised in a calming gesture. We don't have enough for a conviction yet, Marcus. Not yet. The vial in the trash is circumstantial evidence. The photos show him touching the pills, but not definitively what was in them. A good defense lawyer would tear it apart in court, would make it look like we're reaching. We need more. We need him to say it out loud. We need a full confession recorded on tape that can't be disputed. Ashford wheeled himself closer, his ancient eyes burning into mine with an intensity that made me listen. You have to go back there, Marcus. You have to walk into that house and look at the man who killed your wife, and you have to smile at him. You have to play the part perfectly. Be the grieving, confused old man they think you are, the senile fool they can manipulate. Let them believe they've won, that you're helpless. Let them get comfortable. Let them get sloppy. Because when they're comfortable, when they think they're safe, they'll make mistakes. And when they slip up, when they get arrogant, we'll be there to catch them. Can you do that, Marcus? Can you be a soldier one last time for Margaret? I looked at the journal one more time. I looked at the photos spread across the desk. I thought about Margaret, about her beautiful smile. I thought about the fear she must have felt in those final days, knowing her own son wanted her dead, living in terror in her own home. I took a deep breath that hurt my ribs. I straightened my jacket with deliberate care. I picked up my cane, feeling its familiar weight. I was a soldier once, a long time ago in a place far from here. I know how to follow orders, even impossible ones. And I know how to wait patiently for the perfect kill shot, for the moment when the enemy exposes himself. I'll do it, I said, my voice steady now, cold as winter. I'll do whatever it takes. Ashford nodded with approval. Good man. Now listen very carefully, Marcus. Here's exactly what we're going to do, step by step. And as he laid out the plan in meticulous detail, I felt the old soldier inside me waking up from a long, long sleep, stretching dormant muscles, sharpening dulled instincts. My son thought he was a predator, the hunter stalking easy prey. He thought I was just a weak old man, confused and helpless. He was about to find out that he had walked straight into the den of a lion who still had teeth and claws and nothing left to lose. The sun went down, but the heat stayed trapped inside the house like a fever that wouldn't break. The air was thick, heavy with the smell of cheap whiskey and raw fear that seemed to seep from the walls. Devin didn't bother locking me in the bedroom anymore. There was no point. He sat in the middle of the living room in my favorite armchair, the one Crystal hadn't destroyed yet in her rampage. On his lap lay a 12-gauge shotgun, old and rusted at the barrel. Something he'd picked up at a pawn shop years ago for hunting trips he never actually took. He was cleaning it, running an oily rag over the stock with slow, deliberate strokes that made my skin crawl. The sound of metal on cloth was the only noise in the room, a rhythmic whisper of violence, of threat. He didn't look at me. He just stared at the wall across from him, his eyes glazed and distant, gone somewhere dark. He had stopped pretending days ago. The mask of the grieving son, the concerned caregiver, it was all gone now, stripped away. What was left was a man pushed into a corner, a man who saw no way out except through me, over my dead body. I sat on the edge of my bed in the darkened room down the hall. The door was open just a crack, just enough to see a sliver of light from the hallway, just enough to hear everything. I could hear Crystal moving around in the dining room, her movements frantic and purposeful. The sound of packing tape being ripped from a roll was sharp and loud in the quiet house, violent somehow. Rip, smooth, over and over again. She was packing. Not clothes, not personal items or memories. She was packing the silver candlesticks Margaret polished every week. She was taking down the oil paintings Margaret had collected over 30 years, wrapping them in bubble wrap. She was disconnecting the flat-screen TV, preparing to haul it away. I heard her muttering to herself, a low stream of curses and calculations that chilled my blood. She wasn't planning on sticking around to care for a senile father-in-law. Oh no, she was liquidating assets, getting ready to run. She was getting her cut before the ship went down completely. The moment the money hit the account, she'd be gone like smoke. She would leave Devin to deal with the mess, to deal with my body. I knew her type all too well. She was a survivor, a parasite who would attach and find a new host the moment the current one dried up and died. She didn't care about Devin. She didn't care about the debt or his problems. She just wanted a cut of the money before everything collapsed, before the police came knocking. The phone rang suddenly, breaking the tense silence. It wasn't a house phone. It was Devin's cell, sitting on the coffee table next to a half-empty bottle of bourbon. The ringtone was loud, jarring, aggressive. Devin didn't answer it right away. He let it ring once, twice, 3 times, each ring echoing through the house like a countdown. Then he picked it up with a shaking hand. He put it on speaker, maybe out of habit, maybe because he wanted me to hear, to understand why he was about to do what he was about to do. "Marco," he said, his voice cracking like dry wood. "Please, I just need a few more hours. Just until morning." The voice on the other end was calm, professional, terrifying in its politeness. "Devin," the voice said, smooth as silk, "you're out of hours. You're out of time. My associates are on their way to your location right now. They have very specific instructions. If the money is not in the account by 9 a.m. tomorrow morning, they start with your knees, work their way up slowly. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" The line went dead with a click that sounded like a gunshot. Devin stared at the phone in his hand. He took a long, desperate pull from the bourbon bottle, the amber liquid spilling down his chin, dripping onto his shirt. He wiped it away with the back of his hand, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. His eyes were red-rimmed, wild with fear and alcohol. He stood up slowly, the shotgun clutched tight in his hand like a lifeline. He swayed slightly, the alcohol and terror mixing into a dangerous, explosive cocktail. He looked down the hall, right at my door. I could feel his eyes on me through the darkness. I heard his footsteps, heavy and uneven on the floorboards, getting closer and closer. He was coming for me. I reached under the mattress, my fingers brushing the cold steel of my own revolver hidden there. But I didn't pull it out. Not yet. I needed him close. I needed him to commit completely, to cross the line so far there was no going back. I needed his confession on tape, every word of it. The door to my room burst open, slamming against a wall with force that cracked the plaster, leaving a dent. Devin stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the hall light behind him. He looked like a monster from a nightmare, something that shouldn't exist. In one hand, he held the shotgun, the barrel pointed directly at my chest. In the other, he clutched a crumpled piece of paper. It was a power of attorney form, the one Solomon Gold had left behind. "Sign it," he rasped, his voice sounding like gravel grinding together, inhuman. "Sign it right now, old man, or I swear to God I will paint this room with your brains and tell the police it was suicide." The barrel of the shotgun looked like a tunnel into the afterlife, into nothing. It was dark and smelled of gun oil and old rust and death. I stared right down the center of it, into that darkness. I didn't blink. I didn't look away. My heart was beating a slow, steady rhythm against my ribs. It was a rhythm of a man who had made his peace with death a long, long time ago in a jungle far away from here, in a war that never really ended. Devin was shaking, trembling like a leaf in a storm. The tremors started in his hands and worked their way up his arms until his whole body was vibrating with a mixture of bourbon and adrenaline and raw terror. He looked pathetic and dangerous at the same time. He looked like a complete stranger wearing my son's face, a mask that didn't fit quite right. The paper crinkled in his fist, the sound loud in the quiet room. "Sign it!" he screamed again, his voice breaking. "Sign the paper and I'll let you live. I'll put you in a home somewhere nice. You'll be safe and taken care of. Just sign the damn paper and this all ends." I looked from the gun to his eyes. They were bloodshot, swimming in tears and rage and desperation. He was breaking apart at the seams, coming completely undone. I knew I had to push him over the edge. I needed him to say it out loud. I needed the recording device hidden under the floorboard to catch every syllable of his sin, every word of his confession. I leaned back on the mattress, rested my weight on my elbows, completely calm. I didn't reach for the pen he'd thrown on the bed. Instead, I asked the question that had been burning a hole in my soul for days. "Why did you kill your mother, Devin?" I asked, my voice clear and steady. "Why did you murder the woman who gave you life?" The question hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating, impossible to ignore. What would you do in this moment? Would you sign? Would you fight? Tell me. Devin flinched like I had slapped him hard across the face. The shotgun dipped for just a second, wavering, then snapped back up, pointing at my head. "Shut up," he hissed, his voice venomous. "You don't know what you're talking about, old man. You don't know anything." "I know about the pills," I said, my voice calm and low, controlled. "I know you switched them. I know you watched her die, watched her suffer. Why, son? Was the money really worth it? Was it worth your mother's life? Devin let out a sound that was half laugh and half sob, a horrible broken noise. He lowered the gun slightly, pacing the small room like a caged animal, trapped and desperate. You want to know why? He shouted, his voice echoing off the walls. You really want to know the truth? Fine, because she was a miser, Dad. A greedy old miser, sitting on millions. Millions. And she watched me drown. She watched me struggle to pay my car lease. She watched me borrow from Marco, get deeper and deeper in debt. She knew I was scared, knew I was in trouble. And what did she do? She lectured me. She told me I needed to be more responsible, to grow up. She told me she was cutting me off completely. He stopped pacing and pointed the gun at my face again, his expression twisted into a mask of pure, undiluted hatred. She found out about the gambling. She found my ledger where I tracked everything. She said she was going to change the trust, leave it all to charity. Can you believe that, Dad? She was going to give my inheritance to complete strangers while her own son was getting his knees broken by loan sharks. She was selfish. She was cruel to me. He took a sloppy swig from the bottle of bourbon he'd brought with him, wiping his mouth with his sleeve, the alcohol loosening his tongue just as we had hoped it would. I didn't want to hurt her, he slurred, the words tumbling out now. I just needed time. I needed the money immediately. Right then, it was so easy, Dad. She was old. Her heart was weak already. All I did was give her a little push, a little nudge. I switched the beta blockers for the stimulants. It wasn't even poison, not really. It was just medicine, the wrong medicine. If she had been stronger, she would have survived. It's her fault she was weak. It's her fault she was stingy with her own son. She forced my hand. She made me do it. I listened to every single word. I etched them into my memory, burned them into my brain. He was blaming her, blaming the victim for his own crime, for his own evil. He was a coward, a greedy, entitled coward who thought the world owed him a living, owed him wealth he hadn't earned. He didn't see a mother when he looked at Margaret. He saw a bank account. He didn't see murder. He saw a business transaction, a problem solved. He threw the paper onto the bed next to me violently. He tossed a cheap ballpoint pen down beside it. Enough talking, he growled, his patience completely gone. I'm done explaining myself to you. Marco is coming at 9 in the morning. I need this signed and notarized by my guy before he gets here. Sign it, old man. Sign it right now, or I swear on everything I will pull this trigger and tell the police it was a suicide. I'll tell them you couldn't live without Mom. It'll be poetic, tragic even. I looked at the paper, that power of attorney document giving Devin full control over all my assets and any future assets. It was a key to the kingdom he thought he had already won. I looked at the pen, a cheap blue Bic, bitten at the cap. I reached out slowly and picked it up. My hand didn't shake at all. I felt a strange sense of absolute calm wash over me like a wave. This was it. The final move in a game Devin didn't even know he was playing. I sat up slowly, carefully, swinging my legs over the edge of the bed. Devin took a step back, keeping the gun level at my chest, his finger on the trigger. That's it, he said, his voice trembling with anticipation, with greed. Just sign the line at the bottom. Then it's all over. Then we can both move on. I placed the paper on the nightstand carefully. I smoothed out the wrinkles he had made with his sweating hands. I clicked the pen, the sound sharp in the silence. I looked up at him one last time. I wanted to remember this moment forever. I wanted to remember the look of triumph in his eyes before I destroyed him completely, before I burned his world to ashes. I didn't sign my name. I didn't write Marcus Sullivan in the space provided. I pressed the tip of the pen into the paper hard enough to tear the fiber, to gouge the wood beneath. I wrote in big, bold block letters that filled the entire signature line. I wrote 4 simple words. I know what you did. I put the pen down carefully. I picked up the paper. I held it up so he could see it clearly, could read every letter. Devin squinted in the dim light, leaning forward, lowering the shotgun just slightly. He read the words, his lips moving silently, forming the shapes. I know what you did. He froze completely, every muscle in his body going rigid. The triumph vanished from his face instantly, replaced by a look of absolute confusion, and then dawning, terrible horror. He looked at the paper, then at my eyes. And in my eyes, he finally saw the soldier, the warrior. He saw the man who had been hunting him all along. He realized in that split second that I wasn't senile. I wasn't confused. I wasn't a helpless victim. He realized he confessed everything to a completely sane man, a man who had recorded every word. A guttural roar of pure rage erupted from his throat, animalistic and raw. He raised a shotgun high, aiming it directly at my head, his finger tightening on the trigger. The metal clicked as he took up the slack, preparing to fire. I stared into the black hole of the barrel, into my own death, and I did not blink, did not flinch. Then the world exploded around us. What happened next, the chaos that erupted, it would determine whether justice would finally be served or whether my son would get away with murder forever. There was a deafening crash in the front of the house, an explosion of sound. The heavy wood door splintered and tore, metal hinges ripping from the frame with a screech of tortured metal. It sounded like a bomb going off, like the world ending. The front door had been breached by force. Devin flinched violently, his head snapping toward the hallway, his eyes going wide. Beams of blinding white light cut through the darkness of the house like surgical lasers, slicing into the bedroom where we stood frozen. A voice amplified by a powerful megaphone boomed through the shattered doorway, shaking the very walls, rattling the windows in their frames. Police, drop the weapon. Drop it now. We have the house completely surrounded. Devin looked back at me, his eyes impossibly wide with the realization that his time had run out, that the trap had finally closed. But he didn't drop the gun like a rational person would. He panicked completely. He grabbed me by the collar of my shirt with his free hand and hauled me up roughly, using my body as a shield against the inevitable justice coming down the hall toward us. The room exploded with light brighter than the sun, brighter than anything I'd ever seen. And it wasn't just the hallway anymore. Beams cut through the bedroom windows from outside, shattering the glass with the sheer intensity, with the force of the sound waves from a megaphone outside. This is the police. We have the house surrounded. Drop the weapon and come out with your hands up where we can see them. The voice was godlike, commanding, shaking the floorboard beneath our feet and rattling the pictures on the walls. I saw dust motes dancing in the beams of light, like spirits disturbed from their rest, like ghosts awakening. Devin flinched again, his grip on my shirt tightening until I thought the cheap fabric would tear right off my body. He looked around wildly. A trapped animal realizing the cage had no door, no escape, and the hunter was already inside. The shotgun wavered in his hand, shaking back and forth. For just a second, I thought he might actually drop it. I thought he might surrender and end this nightmare with some tiny shred of dignity intact. But desperation does strange things to a man. It turns fear into aggression. It turns panic into violence. He didn't drop the gun. Instead, he screamed, a raw, primal sound of denial that tore at his throat. He wasn't ready to give up his inheritance, his ticket out of debt. He wasn't ready to face the consequences of his sins, of what he'd done. The light blinded us both, turning the room into a high-contrast nightmare of shadows and brilliant glare. I squinted against the brilliance, my heart pounding a war drum in my chest. This was it. The cavalry had arrived just like Ashford promised. But now I was directly in the line of fire, and the bullet was already in the chamber of Devin's gun. I heard a commotion from the back of the house, a sudden crash and violent shouting. It was Crystal, her voice unmistakable. I could picture it perfectly in my mind. She had probably grabbed her bag of stolen silver and made a desperate run for the kitchen door the moment the first siren wailed in the distance, because she was a survivor above all else. A rat leaving the sinking ship before the water even touched her expensive shoes. But she didn't make it far. Not even close. I heard her scream, a high-pitched shriek of indignation and pure terror that cut through all the other noise. Then came a voice I recognized, and it wasn't a cop. It was Christopher Ashford himself. Going somewhere, Mrs. Sullivan? His voice boomed, magnified by some kind of speaker system. I believe the police have some very specific questions about a poisoned dog and several forged checks in your possession. She was caught, trapped. Ashford had his private security team covering all the exits. every possible escape route. The police had missed nothing. There was absolutely no way out for either of them. Devin heard it too. He heard his wife being cornered like an animal. He heard his entire world collapsing around him in real time. He looked at me, and his eyes were completely void of anything human anymore. They were black pits of panic and madness. He spun me around roughly, slamming my back hard against his chest, hooking his arm around my neck in a chokehold, cutting off my air. He jammed the barrel of the shotgun against my temple, and the metal was hot now, heated by his feverish grip, burning my skin. "Back off!" He screamed at the empty doorway, at the light, at everyone. "I'll kill him. I swear to God, I'll blow his head off right now. Get back, or the old man dies." He dragged me into the hallway, using my body as a shield, my feet dragging helplessly on the carpet. I smelled his sweat, acid and sour and terrified. I felt his heart hammering against my back like it was trying to escape his chest, a frantic, erratic rhythm. He was strong with the strength of the insane, of the desperate, pushing me toward the living room, toward the lights, thinking somehow he could bargain his way out of a murder charge, negotiate his way to freedom. "I want a car," he yelled at the windows, at the shadows beyond. "I want a clear path out of here, or the old man dies right here. Right now. Do you hear me?" He forgot who he was holding. He forgot that before I was a warehouse manager, before I was a husband and father, I was a sergeant in a platoon that saw things no man should ever have to see. He thought he held a frail, helpless old man. He thought he held a victim who would simply submit. He was so very wrong. We stepped into the blinding white light of the living room, and the glare hit Devin full in the face like a physical force. He blinked hard, momentarily disoriented, his grip loosening just a fraction as he tried to shield his eyes from the assault of brightness. That was the mistake. That tiny moment of weakness. That was the opening I had been waiting for, trained for. I didn't think. I didn't plan. I just reacted with muscle memory buried under 40 years of peace, surging to the surface, instant and lethal. I dropped my weight suddenly, making myself heavy as lead, dead weight, as he stumbled forward to compensate, to keep his balance. I drove my right elbow back with every single ounce of strength I possessed, every bit of power left in my old body. It connected perfectly with his solar plexus, a solid meat-on-bone impact that I felt all the way up my arm. I felt the air leave his lungs in a wet, desperate whoosh. He doubled over, the shotgun barrel dipping toward the floor, his grip faltering. I spun around like I was 20 years old again, grabbing the barrel with my left hand and his wrist with my right. I twisted with violent torque, with controlled fury. A sharp snap echoed through the room as his finger broke inside the trigger guard, the bone giving way. He screamed in agony, a sound I'll never forget. I ripped the weapon from his hands with a final, powerful jerk and swept his legs out from under him with a kick that would have shattered a younger man's knee completely. He hit the floor hard, his back slamming into the wood. The wind was not completely out of him, his eyes going wide. Devin lay on the floor gasping for air like a fish out of water, clutching his broken hand, his face a twisted mass of agony and complete shock. I stood over him, breathing hard. The shotgun felt natural in my hands, heavy and familiar, like an old friend returned after long absence. I pumped the action, ejecting a shell that spun to the air in what felt like slow motion and clattered onto the hardwood floor with metallic ring. I leveled the barrel at his forehead, right between his eyes. He looked up at me, and for the very first time in his entire life, he saw the truth. He saw the father who had protected him his whole life, and the soldier who could end him without hesitation. I tightened my finger on the trigger, feeling the resistance. The rage was a roaring fire inside me, demanding blood, demanding justice, demanding payment for what he'd done to Margaret. Then the front door burst inward with a shower of splinters and broken wood. Men in tactical gear swarmed the room like ants, weapons raised and ready. "Mr. Sullivan, don't shoot!" A voice shouted urgently. "Drop the weapon. Mr. Sullivan, please don't do it. Tell me in the comments. And if you've dealt with something similar, share your story. You're not alone. Subscribe for more stories about standing your ground and reclaiming your life. Because what happened next changed everything. The fluorescent lights of the police precinct hummed with a low electric buzz that drilled into my skull, but it was nothing compared to the silence on the other side of the one-way glass. I sat in the observation room, my hands resting on my cane, watching my son through the mirror. Devin was handcuffed to a metal table, looking small and broken. His right hand was splinted and bandaged where I had broken his finger, a stark, white reminder of our struggle. He looked so small in that chair, so pathetic. The expensive suit was rumpled and stained with sweat and dust. He was leaning forward, speaking to the detective with a frantic energy that reeked of desperation, of a drowning man grasping at straws. I could hear every word through the speaker system mounted on the wall. He was admitting to the assault. He admitted to threatening me with the shotgun. He called it a breakdown, a moment of grief-induced insanity brought on by his mother's death. But when the detective asked about Margaret, about her death, he shut down completely. He shook his head violently, his eyes going wild. My mother died of a heart attack, he insisted, his voice rising in pitch, getting shrill. She was old. Her heart was weak. I loved her more than anything. I would never, ever hurt her. You have nothing on me for that. Nothing at all. I watched him lie with such conviction, such practiced ease. I watched the boy I had raised, the man I had protected my entire life, twist the truth until it snapped in half. He thought he was smart, so clever. He thought that without a body, without a weapon, he could talk his way out of a murder charge with his silver tongue. He didn't know about the floorboard in my bedroom. He didn't know about the technology of a bygone era that had been recording his every breath, every confession. The door to the interrogation room opened slowly, and the air in the observation booth seemed to get colder, heavier. Solomon Gold walked in, and he didn't look like a lawyer in that moment. He looked like an executioner in a three-piece suit, like the angel of death himself. He carried no briefcase. He held no files or folders. In his hand, he carried a single object that made my heart skip a beat, my old Nokia brick phone, the one I'd hidden under floorboards. It was scratched and worn, a relic from a time when phones were tools, not toys or status symbols. Devin looked up at him, his eyes narrowing in confusion and growing fear. "Who are you?" he demanded, trying to sound authoritative but failing completely. "I want my lawyer. I have rights." Gold didn't answer him. He didn't sit down or introduce himself. He walked calmly to the table and placed the phone in the center of the cold metal surface. The device looked completely out of place, like a stone on a dinner plate, ancient and somehow ominous. Gold pressed a button on the side. The screen glowed a dull, sickly green. He looked at Devin, and for the first time I saw a real, genuine fear flicker in my son's eyes like a candle in the wind, a primal understanding that the trap had snapped shut completely. Gold pressed play without ceremony. The audio was tinny but crystal clear in the acoustically tiled room, every word perfectly preserved. My voice came through first, calm and steady, asking the question that had started this entire nightmare. "Why did you kill your mother, Devin?" Then came the silence, heavy and damning. And then Devin's voice filled the room like poison gas, the voice of the man in the bedroom, the voice of a monster confessing. Because she was a miser. She was sitting on millions, Dad. She forced my hand. I switched the beta blockers for the stimulants. It wasn't poison. It was just medicine. If she had been stronger, she would have survived. It's her fault. Devin stopped breathing completely. He stared at the phone as if it were a venomous snake coiled on the table, ready to strike. The color drained from his face, leaving him gray and ashen, corpse-like. The recording continued playing his justification, his blame, his complete and total confession. Every word was a nail in his coffin, sealing his fate. Every word condemned him. He slumped back in his chair, his mouth opening and closing, but no sound coming out, like a fish gasping for air. He looked at the mirror, looked right at where I was sitting even though he couldn't see me. He knew I was there. He knew I had played him perfectly. He knew that the senile old man he had tried to rob and murder had been 2 steps ahead of him the entire time, leading him exactly where I needed him to go. Gold stopped the recording with a click that sounded final. He didn't say a single word. He just picked up the phone carefully, turned around, and walked out of the room with measured steps, leaving Devin alone with the echo of his own sins, his own damning words. My son put his head on the table and began to sob, his whole body shaking. It wasn't the crying of a remorseful man who regretted his actions. It was a weeping of a man who realized his life was over, that he'd lost everything. The door to the observation room opened and Detective Johnson stepped in, looking tired but deeply satisfied. He held a thick file in his hand. He nodded toward the glass where Devin was now rocking back and forth like a mental patient. I tilted the pouch slowly, watching. The gray dust caught the wind, swirling for a moment in the golden light like magic before settling gently onto the surface of the river. It drifted away, carried by the current toward the sea, toward adventure, toward eternity and peace. "Go see the world, my love," I whispered, my voice breaking just slightly. "You earned it. You earned all of this and so much more." I watched until the very last speck disappeared into the dark water, becoming one with everything. A profound sense of lightness washed over me like baptism, like rebirth. The knot of grief that lived in my chest for an entire year finally loosened, finally let go. She wasn't gone, not really. She was just everywhere now, in everything beautiful. I turned back to Ashford. He handed me a glass of wine, the crystal clinking softly as we touched glasses together. A sound of celebration, not mourning. Of life, not death. "To Margaret," Ashford said, his voice strong and clear. "To Margaret," I replied, my throat tight with emotion, and the justice finally served. We drank. The wine was rich and complex and perfect, like the life we had lived, like the battles we had won. I looked up at the sky where the first stars were beginning to appear over the city of lights, twinkling into existence. I thought of Devin in his cell, staring at concrete walls, eating prison food, dying slowly. I thought of Crystal working in a diner somewhere, trying to pay off her massive fraud restitution, her designer life completely destroyed. I thought of the past, of everything that had happened, but then I let it go, released it like Margaret's ashes into the wind. I smiled, and it wasn't the grim smile of a soldier anymore. It wasn't the sad smile of a widower lost in grief. It was the smile of a man who had walked through absolute fire and come out the other side with his soul completely intact, stronger than before. "We're free, Margaret," I whispered to the wind, to the stars, to her spirit. "We're finally free." This journey taught me something invaluable. Sharing blood doesn't mean you share a heart, doesn't make you family. For years, I excused my son's greed, mistaking his manipulation for misguided ambition for youthful mistakes. I learned the hard way that true family isn't inherited or given by birth. It's built through loyalty, through respect, through unwavering support in the darkest times. I found more brotherhood in a former stranger, in Christopher Ashford, than in the child I raised and loved. We must stop excusing abuse just because it comes from relatives, from people who share our DNA. Blood relation doesn't give anyone the right to destroy you. Never set yourself on fire to keep someone else warm, no matter who they are. Sometimes the ultimate act of self-respect, the bravest thing you can do, is cutting the toxic roots of your family tree to finally let the light back in, to let yourself heal and grow. If you believe justice was truly served, hit that like button and tell me in the comments, would you have left Devin $1 or nothing at all? What would you have done differently? Your answers matter to me. Thank you for listening to my story, for walking this painful journey with me. May you never have to face what I faced. But if you do, may you have the strength to fight back and reclaim your life like I did.